where we are tracking Idalia right now. It is currently in the Northwest Caribbean. Big day today. We need to see the forward motion pick up. We're also looking for more thunderstorm development closer to the eye. Those are key parts of the forecast that could possibly change what we see with the resolution and how things pan out for the state of Florida. Right now, the winds are at 65 miles per hour. The important thing to note as of the latest advisory, which again just dropped from the National Hurricane Center, is the change in speed and also the direction of movement. We're moving up to the north after a jog to the south yesterday, and we're picking up that forward motion up to 7 miles per hour. Once this gets into the Gulf of Mexico, there's a lot of heat there, and also we will have a little more moisture to work with, and unfortunately those are two factors that are going to have a big impact on this storm, and not in a good way. Here's a look at the comparison between the 2 a.m. advisory and the 5 a.m. advisory. Again, winds are up by 5 miles per hour, but the big change is really this. We were stationary during the overnight hours. Now we are changing that direction, moving to the north, and we're picking up forward motion. And that's a big deal because really once this gets into the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to be a game changer in terms of the strengthening of this storm. And this does have the potential here of being a rapidly intensifying hurricane as it approaches the Florida coast Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Here's the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Notice in comparison to what we saw, Saturday, even going back to last Friday, a little more consolidation, right? The skinnier the cone, the more accurate and better focus we have on the trajectory of this storm. Also, it is important to note that the impacts, they're going to be far-reaching outside of this cone. So the cone represents where the center of the storm is 2/3 of the time. It's showing you that potential error from east to west along that track, which is important to point out. I mean, there's a big difference for landfall if we're talking about something that is closer to, Apalachicola in comparison to what could be closer to down by Tampa. There is a little bit of a spread, so that's important to keep in mind. We're still a couple days out, and we could see that landfall site change. Right now, we have tropical storm warnings out for the Yucatan, including Cancun and Cozumel. We also have hurricane warnings out for the west tip of Cuba. It looks like the storm is really going to thread the needle and go right in between. That is a concern because, of course, it will be over water. There's a little bit of mountainous terrain on Cuba, so sometimes that west tip can be on our side, but unfortunately, I think Idalia is going to miss that opportunity and stay out over open water. Hurricane watches are up. Today is your day to prep. Do not waste time. From Apalachicola all the way down to Sarasota, that's our hurricane watch with a tropical storm watch that extends down towards the Florida Keys. So these will upgraded to warnings as we work our way into Tuesday. Storm surge watches are up. That's very important to note, especially for the Big Bend of Florida. This is where we're looking at the highest potential for landfall. This is also one of the worst parts of the coastline for Florida when it comes to storm surge. Throughout the next couple hours, we're going to dive into all the scientific data behind that and why we're so concerned about it. But storm surge is what kills people during hurricanes. So if you live in places like Cedar Key, Spring Hill, listen to your local officials, pay attention, and be ready to act. We do have the internal pressure of Idalia starting to drop, continuing to drop. The wind speeds are continuing to come up in response to that pressure drop. So again, this is really just the beginning of the race. We're looking at conditions that will continue to become more dire. So here is the outlook for today. The red zone, the Big Bend of Florida, it is time to finalize your preparations and take action. If you are asked to evacuate, make sure that you evacuate and don't waste time putting your game plan into action. The set mode stretches from Charleston, South Carolina through Savannah all the way down towards Tampa and Fort Myers. That means that you need to prepare for the storm, but most likely you're going to be sheltering in place, but power outages are likely, problems with water. These are all things that you need to think about. So get your hurricane prep plan in mode. There's a look at Idalia right now on satellite, which the north side of it has been impacted by some dry air. You can see that black and orange pushing in from the north. That's been inhibiting some deep thunderstorm activity really close to the eye. So right now we don't have an eye wall. That's going to be changing over the next 24 hours. This is the visible satellite from yesterday, right before we lost that sunlight. You can clearly see that tight spin of circulation. What we're missing is the deep convection around that circulation. So that change happening over the next 24 hours will be what we are looking for in terms of the development of this system, which will determine the strength. So let's talk about the forecast here. Where do we go from here? So here's a look at the official cone. Again, right now, Idalia is in the Northwest Caribbean. Today is going to be one of those slow days. Not a ton of movement, but we'll be getting into the Gulf of Mexico. Tomorrow, a massive day with quick movement. The storm is going to speed up, and tomorrow it carries a lot of territory in terms of its movement, but also the deepening and strengthening of this storm tomorrow is going to be quite notable. So today is, a day that we have time on our side to do those preparations, but don't take it for granted. Do not sit down and kick up your heels if you live on the Gulf Coast of Florida. You got to make sure that you get everything done. Now, once we go past impact, which is going to be Wednesday morning, somewhere around the Big Bend, it is going to be pushing into North Florida, impacting southeast portions of Georgia, the coastal areas of South Carolina, North Carolina, and there's the potential that this could reemerge in the Atlantic. That would be a concern because, of course, we have very warm water there. So there are still questions for the end of this forecast track. There's also questions for the exact landfall, but we're coming into concise development here that we are going to have landfall somewhere around the Big Bend. So that's where we need to focus most of our attention right now. Big dip in the jet stream right here. Also, this is Franklin. There's a weak ridge of high pressure developing underneath Franklin, which also is causing this push up to the northeast, kind of working with that trough. So we know where this is going. It is going into Florida. There's no question there. Things are looking a little better for the Florida Panhandle. Unfortunately, they are looking worse for the Big Bend of Florida. And because a lot of the weather will be displaced down to the south, that does mean areas like Tampa, even down towards Naples, really need to look out for impacts from this. Now, looking at the strength, when it comes to hurricane forecasts, the intensity is the tough part. The trajectory of where it's going is where we have fewer errors. Once we talk about the intensity, sometimes there are changes, especially with the Gulf of Mexico when we get close to landfall. Sometimes these storms really ramp up in 6 hours, and you go from having, a Category 1 to sometimes a major Category 3. That's possible, and you can see that in the forecast. There are computer models that say that the ceiling height for this is a Category 3. So again, you need to prepare for worst case scenario, hope for a better scenario, but as long as you prepare for the worst case scenario, you're going to be in a better position. Speaking of worst case scenario, this is the worst case scenario for storm surge. Think about storm surge as water above dry ground. That's a good way for you safely to really visualize this. It is a push of water that comes very quickly, and all of a sudden you're stuck in it. And storm surge is the top killer when it comes to impacts from tropical systems. Red areas, which are highlighted pretty much from Apalachicola down towards Spring Hill, that's over 9 feet. Again, that is worst case scenario, but over 9 feet is the first floor of a house. It is not survivable. Also, looking at areas up to 9 feet from Spring Hill to Tampa, that is not survivable. So there is a very high likelihood that there will be evacuations somewhere between Tampa up towards Apalachicola. So again, it's all about listening out for those local officials to give you that warning to head out and make sure that you're heeding those warnings. Here's a look at the rain impact. So of course, there's going to be heavy rain. Notice the heavy rain, though, extends outside of the cone. Parts of South Florida are going to get a lot of rain, although they will not see as big of a wind impact from Idalia. Looking at right now, the probable landfall site, easily over 1 foot of rain. So we're going to have issues with storm surge. We're going to have tremendous winds, and also we will have flooding rain. So this storm definitely has the potential of having all 3 hitters be a big part of the storm. Very likely set up for flash flooding across the Big Bend. So again, with all these graphics, you see a huge focus on the Big Bend. It is coming into focus that that's going to be the part of the shoreline that we really have to be concerned about. Here's the focus on the wind. So our exclusive Fox model, anything that is gold or brighter is going to be pushing into hurricane force winds. So just on this computer model run, we're talking about Apalachicola all the way down towards maybe St. Pete, that we could see wind gusts that are over 60, 70 miles per hour. And of course, you're talking about stronger winds than that. This is right now forecasted to be at least a Category 1 hurricane with winds maybe 100 miles. Some of that forecast calling for a Cat 2 of 110. These are going to be huge impacts, especially for the landfall site. Now, our exclusive Fox model is showing you the real structure of that storm, where the heavy rain is. Once we go to midnight tonight, we're in the Gulf of Mexico. You're going to notice a huge difference during the day on Tuesday. This is Tuesday, 3 p.m. As we go into landfall, which is early Wednesday morning, notice how those black lines tighten up. Each black line represents a constant amount of pressure. The closer they are, the stronger the winds. There's a big difference there, right? In just about 6 to 12 hours, we're talking about a huge tightening. So this is a storm that is going to intensify all the way until landfall. And we have water temperatures in the upper 80s right off the coast of Florida. This does have the potential of being a very dangerous storm. That is what we're anticipating. So that's what you need to prepare yourself for the Gulf Coast of Florida. Past there, we are going to have issues across across Georgia and also South Carolina. That's why they're highlighted in yellow, the set mode. You need to be prepared to have power outages. You need to be prepared to have extra water on hand. You're not going to be evacuated if you live, in southeast portions of Georgia, but you are going to have some impacts. Now, in terms of, bigger impacts for the coastline, Savannah up towards Charleston, I would watch this storm because there is the potential that it could go over the Atlantic, and that would be a game changer for parts of the Carolinas, and we're just too far out to really know how much of a factor that's going to be. Let's talk about the panhandle here. So Apalachicola, Tallahassee, all the way down towards Fish Creek. Here's a look at the core of Idalia right there. This is Wednesday morning, so about 5-6 hours before we get to landfall, and we have winds that are already gusting above tropical storm strength. Then we look at landfall, which right now at this computer model is tagged at 6 a.m. on Wednesday. That is going to change. Generally speaking, we're looking at Wednesday morning for landfall, and we're talking about winds that are easily over 100 miles per hour at landfall site. So this is going to be a big deal. It's going to be a big hit to the state of Florida, especially for the Big Bend area of the state. We're talking about an area that is very susceptible to storm surge. Also, it is less populated. But the towns that are there, they are small, tight-knit communities. They definitely need to make sure that they're prepared for the threat. As we go into Thursday, everything's out of here. We're talking about a quick hit. Most of the weather is going to be out of the Big Bend of Florida by the time we get to Wednesday night. Here's a look at the panhandle for rain total. So St. Mark's down towards Fish Creek, we're looking at 8 to 12 inches of rain. So inland flooding is going to be an issue. Look at the rain totals you push up into southern portions of Georgia. Easy 5 to 8 inches of rain. So Georgia, parts of South Carolina, North Carolina, there's going to be a big threat when it comes to inland flooding because of what we're tracking with what will be Hurricane Idalia. Well, the hurricane hunters